Welcome to Briefly Legal, your podcast briefing on legal news, developments, and legislation on the go. Brought to you by the attorneys of Crowe and Dunlevy. The following should not be considered as a substitute for legal advice. Visit crowedunlevy.com for more information.
Hello, everyone. It's your host, Adam Childers, back with the podcast Briefly Legal, brought to you by the law firm of Crowe and Dunlevy. I'm here in the Crow's Nest in Oklahoma City, the day after the solstice, longest day of the year. So as we begin our backward slide towards winter, I'm happy to be joined today by a host, or excuse me, a guest that has been with us multiple times. He's becoming quite a star of the show. But today we're going to harken back to something that he and I talked about on episode 12 of Briefly Legal, and that's forever chemicals, which means our guest today could be none other than Tim Sowecke. Say hello to everybody, Tim.
Hello, podcast world. Happy to be here. Happy to be talking more PFAS today.
You betcha. Yeah, you took the words, or at least the acronyms, right out of my mouth. When we talk about forever chemicals, we're talking about PFOA, PFAS, and there's a reason that I use those acronyms. There's some really long chemical-based names that go along with forever chemicals, but Tim will talk a little bit about that. And, of course, he's a great candidate to be doing that, of course, because he's one of our rising stars here at the law firm, a senior associate. Tim is in our energy, environment, and natural resources practice group and deals with these kinds of issues for our client base on a regular basis, which is why he monitors these situations. And when something new happens that's worth talking about, well, then he reaches out to our producer, Tyler, and says, let's tee up another one of those visits to the Crow's Nest, which is what we have done today. So let's get started, Tim. For those who have slept since episode 12, when we talked about forever chemicals, tell us a little bit about PFOA, PFAS, what they are and why they've become kind of something that's really kind of prominent both in the scientific world, but really in the legal world as well.
Yeah, good question. So these are fairly long scientific names and acronyms for those names. We're talking about PFAS, PFAS, and this is an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are organic compounds characterized by a carbon chain, which can be short or long, with a covalent bond or bonded to fluorine atoms. And in nature, it creates a highly durable, persistent, bioaccumulative substance, and in some cases, a toxic substance, we're learning. These chemicals were commercialized. They were developed during World War II out of companies that we're familiar with, DuPont, 3M, and found commercialization after the war in products such as Teflon, Scotchgard, and in particular, Teflon has a specific PFAS in it known as PFOA or C8, which was the subject of a movie that some folks are familiar with, In Dark Waters. And has been slowly banned from manufacturing in the United States. Now, PFOS is another form of PFAS as well, popularly known as Scotchgard. And these are waterproof finishes. So back to why was PFAS commercialized? Why is it important to us as an industrial and a commercial product? Well, it's heat resistant, it's water resistant, it's highly durable. But the costs for that, there are environmental costs, and those there's mounting evidence, mounting scientific literature that some of these specific PFAS, PFOA and PFOS specifically are carcinogenic and may have other adverse health effects. So EPA is on this. They've been gearing up for this for years, and they did something last week that I just felt compelled to come to the Crow's Nest and make like Paul Revere and say the PFAS regulations really are coming here.
Well, and you said as much when we've talked about this before, that this is too important for the EPA to swing and miss. That regulations would be coming, mostly because as usual, the science had kind of outstripped the regulation early on. Now there seems to be some catching up, and so as you had prognosticated, there was some efforts that just last week by the EPA to try to catch up a little bit. So tell our viewers, our listeners, and our viewers, as we're taping this on video as well as audio today, but tell them a little bit about what the EPA did last week.
Yeah, so EPA on June 15th issued updated health advisory levels for 4 specific PFAS. And these are perfluorooctanoic acid, that's PFOA, popularly known as Teflon, perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, PFOS, that's Scotchgard and derivatives thereof, perfluorobutane sulfonic acid and its potassium salts. Now, that was a shorter chain PFAS developed as a replacement for PFOS, but it is also mounting a significant amount of scientific evidence is showing that it is potentially carcinogenic and
even as a replacement,
health effects. And then we have hexafluoropropylene oxide, FPO. This is also recognized as Gen X chemicals, and this was also a replacement, a shorter chain PFAS, less carbon atoms in that particular compound for PFOA, Teflon. But again, these shorter chain PFAS are still persistent and bioaccumulative in the environment and showing some adverse health effects. So
I think it's cute that there's like a little family there. We even have our Gen Xers that are in there. I guess at some point we'll get some millennials in there too. But for now, the replacement Gen Xers need to be regulated. That sounds familiar to me.
Yeah, and I could see folks grumbling. These Gen X chemicals, they don't do what those longer chain PFAS used to do, and they don't work like we wanted them to do. But I digress. So EPA comes out with these updated health advisory levels. What's interesting is that they've had these since 2016, the health advisory levels for PFOA and PFOS, and that was at 70 parts per trillion. And again, these are very small. We're in a different order of magnitude in terms of these measurements. But last week, what's interesting, a drastic reduction in the limits that EPA is issuing under this health advisory. And for PFOA, that is 0.004 parts per trillion or 4 parts per quadrillion. For PFOS, that's 0.02 parts per trillion. So we've gone from 70 ppt to very, very minute levels. And what's very interesting, at the same time that EPA released these updated health advisory levels, they indicated that there's no labs currently that can detect these limits.
Well, that's my next question. Who finds some part in a quadrillion?
No labs at this time.
Okay.
And EPA is still developing sampling methodologies to address these levels, these detectable levels. What's interesting from the EPA's public press releases that went out in concert with the updated health advisories, EPA is essentially indicating that new epidemiological studies, human studies, and animal studies are showing that the presence of any PFOA or any PFOS in drinking water will potentially cause adverse health effects.
Well, that seemed to be the takeaway. When if you can't really test it to that level and it's at such an infinitesimal level, it sounds like the takeaway is you don't want that in your drinking water at any level.
Exactly. And EPA is authorized to do this. What's important is under the Safe Drinking Water Act, EPA may publish these health advisories for contaminants that are not yet regulated. But also in these press releases, and if we hark back to a document that EPA created in October 2021 called its Strategic PFAS Roadmap, EPA has been showing the regulated community its cards. Right. It's been saying we are moving towards regulating specific PFAS under a number of federal environmental statutes. name this one in this particular context, the Safe Drinking Water Act. And so as part of that press release, EPA, true to the roadmap that they issued in October 2021, said this is a step towards regulating these as contaminants under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we expect to propose regulations in this regard in fall of 2022.
Okay.
So they're following their roadmap. They're moving forward. But these are very low levels of water, of these contaminants in drinking water. And it's going to cause some issues.
I'm sure. And so that's leads to probably the last area of inquiry for us, which is couldn't help but notice, of course, it's styled as an advisory, meaning it's not got a binding effect. At least that's what it sounds like to me. And I'll let you opine on that. But it is still a precursor, it sounds like, to some regulation that would have a binding effect. So for those members of the business community out there that have to worry about these regulations, do you think that they could get even tighter, or is there going to be perhaps in the regulation process a little bit more give and take, knowing that it could cause some of those problems? So speak to that issue.
Well, to address your first point, yes, this is guidance. It's non-binding. Again, it's a strong policy signal from the EPA that we are going to put teeth on this regulation in the near future. To the regulated community, or to the community in general, how to respond to this. First of all, I want to say this is drinking water. This is something that we consume on a daily basis. And so I do want to start with at the consumer level. EPA has issued some Q&As and some guidance in relation to the issuance of these updated health advisories. And one is consumers. If you are concerned with the possible presence of PFAS, particular PFOA, PFOS in your drinking water supply, you're free to contact your operator of your water utility and request if they are monitoring this or where they are at in terms of PFAS monitoring. Mm-hmm. Admittedly, a lot of water operators are not there yet. Again, as we discussed, the technology and the monitoring isn't quite there to detect these limits of PFAS. Mothers that may be breastfeeding. This is another, these are real important nexuses where PFAS hits real human beings. Mothers, if you're concerned with your breast milk, having PFAS contamination and potentially causing adverse health effects to your child, consult your physician. We can do blood tests and detect various levels of PFAS. I get back to water operators, utilities. They're going to get hit pretty hard here. These are very low detectable limits. It will require incredible technology improvements, upgrades to facilities, rural water providers, urban water providers. We're seeing a fair amount of efficacy with granular activated carbon inputs to filter out potential PFAS in drinking water and water operations. But now is the time to prepare for these anticipated regulations. Again, getting back to EPA sending a strong signal here, this is a real issue. It needs to be addressed. For the first time in EPA's history, as far as I can tell, this roadmap really has outlined to the regulated community where EPA is headed, and it's provided a time frame for this. So there's really, the regulated community needs to pay attention here and address this wave of PFAS regulations that's going to start with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And then the next step is identifying as a hazardous substance and subject to Superfund regulation. And so in that context, if a site is contaminated with legacy PFAS, EPA can go after the succession of ownership related to that property that caused that contamination.
And then the real fun begins.
And then the real fun for lawyers begins. Yes.
That's right. Well, and I'm glad you kind of covered such a broad canvas there, because it's not just the business community it would be a disservice, I think, for them to say, well, the testing's not there. I'll worry about that another time. I think that you have to be ready for the remediation efforts. You have to be ready for the PR issues that come with this. This is a a loaded topic. And as you said, the EPA has laid down the gauntlet, and they have continued to march along that roadmap as they have said to the communities that they would. So there's no surprise here. It's just whether or not you're going to get ready. And it's by partnering with lawyers like Tim and members of our Energy and Environment and Natural Resources group that you're able to do that. And so appreciate you keeping your eyes and ears on these developments, Tim. And I'm sure this will be the second installment of what will be multi-series in the future, because it's an important issue and one that's really developing by the day. So thanks.
Indeed, we could do multiple podcasts on this. There's so much to cover. The PFAS regulations are moving on the daily here, and you need some agility, and you need to stay apprised of what's happening at the EPA level. And I'd be remiss to not point out that a number of states are also setting contaminant levels for various PFAS. And Oklahoma does not have a statute in the books yet. They have had proposed legislation 2 years ago, and then this past session it didn't make it into the session. But these state regulations are coming as well. We just saw in the latest legislative session in Colorado a consumer protection legislation that is banning PFAS in a number of consumer goods, from cosmetics to clothing, and even intentionally adding PFAS in hydraulic fracturing fluids. That we saw that in Colorado. So again, whether it's the federal government through the EPA moving forward on this, or the states, these persistent chemicals are going to persist with moving forward in regulations, and I would advise everyone to stay updated on this, because it's really quite fascinating.
It sure is, and appreciate it. So let's close things out. We always like to play get to know your crow, and Tim's played it with us before, so I figure we'll change things up a little bit. I figure it's officially summer now, right? It
feels like it.
Yeah, most people think it's as soon as the kids get out of school, but of course it's about middle of June that actually happens. But makes me think about the summer music series. Tim and I are both, music guys and enjoy live music quite a bit. Of course, now that you actually get to have some live music, it makes it even better. So I'm going to set this up and tell you that. So I kind of kicked off my summer concert series by kind of channeling my inner 90s, and went to see the Smashing Pumpkins at the Zoo. The Zoo's always a great place to watch a show. It was one of those nights where, it was just starting to rain. The temperature was down, and Billy Corgan and the gang sounded just like they did, at least in my mind, in the 90s. So I had an excellent night. But I hear that you went to an even better venue here recently and got to enjoy yourself. So tell us how you kicked off your summer concert series.
Yeah, I say this, a little apprehensively. I attended a concert at Red Rocks, which is an incredible venue, 2 weeks ago. The act I saw was admittedly a Grateful Dead cover band known as Joe Russo's Almost Dead. I am a kind of a Grateful Dead nerd, I admit, but an absolutely amazing show. Kind of the everyone, very much wanting to be there, very positive environment. I think we're all celebrating large gatherings of people that feel safe these days. And so it was a great concert. As the evening descended, a little cooler. It was a little bit of a respite from Oklahoma's heat. Yeah. And just some groovy tunes, Adam.
Very, very cool. I hate to admit this, of all the great venues that are out there, and as many times I've had a chance to see a show there, and I know all about Red Rocks, I have not seen a show there.
Oh, you got to go.
I know. This is the common reaction I draw from music aficionados, and I feel regret and shame when I say it out loud. So maybe now that I've come clean in the Briefly Legal podcast space, this will motivate me to take that that off my ledger. But well, good. I'm glad that that's probably just the first step of many shows during the summer, and for myself as well. And it's good that you get a little bit of a respite from memorizing all these chemical names, which I promise you I would not be able to do. So we'll draw the show to a close now, and I'll thank Tim once again for the excellent work he does in this area. And for those of you out there in the community that just want to know more about it, think of Tim as a great resource for that, because he certainly is. So that draws us to the close of the show. Just want to thank everyone out there for listening and or watching, and to remind you that when you do check us out on your podcast space of choice, if you like what you're hearing, and I really feel like that you do, I would be most appreciative, as all of the Briefly Legal team would be, if you'd be so kind as to give us a nice rating and or follow us. It does a lot for our sense of worth, and we sure do enjoy getting to see the feedback that we get from all of you out there. We're continuing to put up some great numbers and reaching even more of you, and we're really, really excited about that. So until next time, I'm going to sign off and tell everybody out there, be safe, be kind to one another, and we look forward to seeing you here once again next time on Briefly Legal.